Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is a landscape rehab video series, and I think today will be part 4 of this, so you can go back and watch the first 3. The camera is filming across what was part 1. These were things that were planted last year, and some annuals have just been added out here in the front. One of the last pieces I'm standing down in right now. There's a retaining wall. This lot drops a lot from the front of the road to down to the bottom. And if you go back and watch that first video, we walked through the entire space. It has this sunken area right here where I'm standing, and there's a brick path that goes through it. This will be the 5th video. Some holes have been dug. There's a lot of deconstruction happening in here right now. There was a lot of weedy things that needed to come out. Some shrubs that were kind of out of place. There were some larger things here that it was a shadier space. It's a little more sunny than it was. And so pretty much everything being replaced here outside of a rhododendron and a few nandinas that are being left in place. There's a few challenges here. Anywhere in the fenced in space in this landscape, there's a dog, a male dog, and he likes to pee on everything. So part of what you're gonna see in these part 4 and part 5 is thinking through kind of putting targeted plants in place. The plants on the corners will all be urine resistant or salt resistant. And so that's that was one of the things that's been thought through in this project. But part 4 here is along the side of the house. It includes some screening plants. So let's go over there and check that out. So here we are down in this lower bowl. Again, this section will be part 5. There's still some prep work to do in here, and also part of video 5 or part 5 will be some screening plants outside of the gate here. There's a magnolia and some loropetalum and some things that are going to be planted up there to kind of block this view going down the street. Again, it's a nice little low, what could be a private space, but it's on a very busy street, and so we'd like to get a little bit of the view blocked in here. That's part of this plan. Well, again, one of the issues here, we're talking about a male dog that's going to target plants, and so there are things like nandinas used. This will be in a perfect position for him to target as he comes around the corner. Great plant for this. There are, but we'll talk through that as we go. But this was the thinking, was that if we can just get him to hit the plants that will be salt tolerant, then we can use some other things that aren't quite as salt tolerant throughout this landscape. This is the piece for today. This is part 4. It's a very sloped, and I don't know how much the camera will pick up on it, but it's probably, I would say, at least a 6 to 8 foot drop from where I'm standing down to the bottom of this slope, maybe even a hair more than that. There are some things going against the house that are all shade-loving things. Definitely right up against this house is going to be shady. Out here will be a little more sunny, and we're trying to create a bit of a buffer or screen between the neighbor and the house here. And the dog uses this path. This is basically a circle path around the house. He can go around over and over and over again, and we want to make sure that, again, the plants are tolerant of that particular activity. Holes have been dug, and so just going to be popping the plants in the ground. I am using a little bit of composted cow manure as my compost. If you're using cow manure as compost, use a small amount of it. It does have some nitrogen in it. You might burn the roots on your plants if you go too crazy using cow manure. So I'm just going to use a very small amount of cow manure mixed in with this clay soil. Stuff has come down to the bottom of the side where the part 4, what we're going to see go in the ground today is. This was part 2 and 3 down here at the bottom, and you can see this slope continues all the way to the bottom of this property. Steps were installed here, but all of this landscaping went in the fall. There's going to be a final walkthrough of this entire project. It's all going to be mulched, weeded, mulched, and basically a finishing touch to all 5 of these parts. You guys will see that walkthrough when it happens, but the things that were planted down around the patio area look great. The things that were planted up against the retaining wall down here at the bottom, everything looks great. A couple things have been lost, but that's it. Out of a lot of pieces that were put in those first 3 videos. So let's get started on part 4. I'll show you the last hole that needs to be dug here. This is a Utopia plum yew. There's 3 of them going in here at the bottom of the hill. You can see this soil before I even dig. You can see this is the type of clay that's down here. And you can also see how dry it is right now. We are really, really dry. This is crumbling apart. Normally it's kind of cakey, but it's absolutely crumbling apart. That's why I'm putting just a small amount of composted cow manure in it. Again, be careful if you're using cow manure as your compost, because it will have a little bit of nitrogen component to it. There's probably don't even need to add anything. There's so much broken down organic material here. This was mulched for years, and so that's going to get mixed in somewhat. And there are earthworms here trying to do some work. But you get down to this layer, this is what you were dealing with right here, where it's just all solid red clay, a little bit of grayish clay mixed in as well. If you guys have watched the channel for any length of time at all, you know I use this little trenching shovel because it will take little bites out of that clay, just like that, without very much effort at all. If I'm trying to put a big giant shovel into this clay, it's much harder to chip away at it. There we go. I think that's deep enough. And then I'm gonna break this bag open with my shovel and just take one shovel full about like that and mix that in. That's plenty adequate. It says 100% cow manure on this bag, but there's some sort of bark mixed in with it as well. Steph and I are going to sink all of these pieces in the ground, and then we'll go over what they are. And on this slope on the side here, there is an erosion issue. At some point, some sort of treads are going to go along in this path and help control that erosion. Also, some ground cover things are going to go along. There's a lot of fillers that are coming in. Today is just mainly the shrubs and some of the smaller growing perennials, but there are some ground covers going in. Things like a juga, which is super urine tolerant, will be added to the shadier side, and some other things. And we'll film that when that takes place as well. So here we go. We've got a lot of pieces to sink in the ground. We're about halfway up the bank, and I thought I would stop and give you a couple of tips. If you're planting in groups of 3, there's 3 Shindo viburnum going in along the fence. Several things, as we'll go through the plants at the end, have been planted in groups of 3. Pro tip: plant the 2 on the end first, and then plant the center one, and that way it's easier to measure the difference. If you put the second one in, and then the third one has to be adjusted, a lot of times it can't be adjusted. So plant the 2 on the end and then figure out where that center is. Other thing, typical of Shindo viburnum in a container, you can see how bad, how badly root bound this is. And this is the type of plant that I'll just take the shovel and just physically cut, top to bottom in about 4 different spots on a plant like that. I would actually prefer to have them under-rooted than that rooted, but this is pretty typical of a Shindo viburnum in a container. So I just did significant root damage to this plant, but it was needed. Otherwise, those roots are just going to continue to do this. This needs to be reduced, especially planting here, sweating like crazy. Especially planting here in the mid to late May, and we're a little drier than we normally are this time of year. All of this new growth on this really needs to come off. And so after these are planted, we're going to talk through them and everything. The last step here is actually going to come through here and prune off some of the new growth on the things that we knew were a little root bound, meaning that there were crazy amounts of roots down in the container, just to kind of rebalance them a bit. You're doing 25% damage down here. Let's take these down about 25% as well. So there you go, a couple tips. They're in the ground. It is a very muggy May 22nd or something like that. It's a Sunday morning. It's been 91, 95, 91 in the last 3 days. Today they're saying it's cooler, but it's a lot more muggy. So it's quite warm. Again, you saw how dry this soil is. The plants were well watered when they went in the ground. Definitely try not to put dry plants into the ground, but the ground is dry. And I didn't want to water the space and then work in it on a slope. That would not be fun at all. So they really need to be watered well. A tip on that is while you're planting, and I didn't do this, but while you're planting, you can get your water hose and just put it on a trickle on a plant that you've already planted. And then it'll allow you to come back and take a break and move the hose as you go, as you're planting up the hill. So that would be helpful. But put the hose on a slow trickle and water that space until it's well saturated. Superficial watering won't work well here. I mean, if you water just for a minute from here and then walk to the next one and the next one, it's only going to soak down about that far. And we just planted plants down that far. So keep that in mind. They're elevated a bit. One of the things about this space, if you go back and watch the first video, this had been mulched and mulched and mulched and mulched until it was really, really thick. Through the process of doing this job, this mulch is finally broken down. It's time to remulch. Two things happen when you plant the plants. Three things to think about, really. This clay soil, we don't want to plant plants really deep in it. If we build a little bowl around it, the water will find that bowl, where it's sunken down, and the plants will end up staying too wet. So there's one reason to leave them up. The second is we dug the hole a little deeper than the actual root ball. And so the soil underneath the root ball is a little bit loose. And so the plants are actually going to settle a bit. So you're also leaving them up to compensate for the plants. They're actually going to sink into the ground a bit. And third, it's about to be mulched. And so I don't want to bury the plants in mulch. So they've all been left up about this much, about 2 inches or so above the original grade to compensate for the sinking, the clay, and the fresh mulch that will be going down. Typically after I do a job like this, before I mulch, and I'm not mulching today, we're gonna do the fifth job and then the mulch job and then a walkthrough video of the whole place. So you'll be seeing this finished look with the mulch. I didn't bring my garden rake. I usually use the back of my garden rake to rake out a space like this. But after you've done all this planting, you're still gonna have clumps of soil and it's gonna be a bit rough. I wanna get this smoothed out so that the mulch can go down smoothly over the top of it. The back of a push broom works just as well as anything. You can see just like this. I can just take the back of this push broom and move around with it, and I can completely smooth this area out. In fact, this push broom, for me, I'd almost rather use it because it's wider. Just something wide that you can knock down the high spots in the soil after you're done planting. Just to reiterate really quickly, I used a tiny amount, a shovel full and a little skinny trenching shovel full of compost or composted cow manure on each of these holes. I really didn't need to add anything. This had been mulched for so long. Some of that compost was getting mixed in. I'm just trying to keep that clay from recompacting really quickly. I'm hoping to keep a little moisture around them while they, get themselves established. But you don't have to use anything. Keep in mind, there's a million bags of things when you go shopping for plants. Most of you are probably in an area where the soil is fine for the things that you're putting in the ground, and you don't have to amend the soils, okay? You don't have to. And if it's a well-established space, like this has been mulched for years and years and years, you're gonna get some of that organic material going in down in the ground anyway. So again, you're seeing me do that. I almost do it just so I can tell people you don't have to do it, so I can bring that up, okay? So let's start with some of we'll walk through the plants up the side here. Holly ferns have been used, and they're going to be used in several spaces. These are, it's a salt-tolerant fern, shady space down here at the bottom, and they were picked on corners. So, as the puppy makes his way down through here, this is probably going to be a targeted spot. And so that's what the thoughts were here about trying to reduce the urine damage. I've done a few jobs like this in the past at apartment complexes where the dogs outnumbered the people in the apartment complex, and the plants have to be thought through. Indian hawthorns, which are not what you'll see in the last, I think in the fifth part, is a good one. You can Google salt tolerant plants or pea tolerant plants. Make sure you're using those, and you don't have to use just those. Just use them on the corners. If you'll put them in the corners where the dogs are definitely going to target, that's probably good enough. There are 3 Utopia plum yews. You saw me plant the first one. Good shade tolerant, low growing evergreen. This one's not meant to be part of the screen. It's just an understory plant for this for this side. And in fact, I didn't follow my own advice. I need to move this one to right about here. And I'm going to do that as soon as I finish filming, because these three are not aligned very well. And I was just going too fast when I did that one. There's a Florida Sunshine Elysium. This one will end up 6 or 8 feet if you let it, but you can keep this one smaller. If you're looking at this plant can be whatever you need it to be, but it's a gold foliage version of a native to the southeast United States. There's some viburnum. There's 3 viburnum here. They are, I did a pretty good job of spacing those. This is Allegheny viburnum. It'll be a pretty fast growing one. It's already, in fact, they had cut it back. I can see where the nursery had cut them back pretty hard, and they've already come out, you know, as much as a foot here right at the beginning of spring. These screening plants that you're looking at are too close together if you look at a tag. Okay, I want you to keep that in mind, that if you plant screening plants at the appropriate spacing, that you know, if you their maximum width, your grandchildren will get the screen and not you. So they are in here a little bit more. What that will do to the plants in the future is they'll have to stretch a bit for light. It will create a situation, this is years down the road. Years down the road, these plants will thin likely at the bottom. They'll be fuller up at the top, and then they can be underplanted with other evergreen shrubs. It happens on almost every screen anyway, but just pointing this out. These are a few more pieces than are probably necessary, except for you want a screen in your lifetime. So back over to the wall, there are rotating groups of aspidestra or cast iron plant. We wanted to stay under these windows. These are low windows for a basement in this house. Don't want to be blocking that. So the cast iron plants are kind of in front of the windows. And then there's some gold dust acuba. Actually, this isn't gold dust, is it? Marmorata. Yeah, this is a Marmorata, which is a much more colorful variegated acuba that will get a little more size on it, and it's in between the windows. Again, this wall over here is shady. And so going the rest of the way up this wall is a simple rotation of cast iron plants and the Marmorata Japanese acuba. It should be colorful up against this brick wall. Keep that in mind when you're landscaping with brick. Another thing I'd like to point out here is dark foliage or purple foliage plants sometimes can clash with it, or plants that turn colors in the wintertime. You have to think about, you know, what's its fall color going to be? What's its winter color going to be? So sometimes things turn orange, you know, and they clash with brick. So that's something we do think about. These acuba stay the same year round. Cast iron plants are evergreen. The only maintenance really to do on these is this time of year, actually, we'll take, or slightly earlier, we'll take the tattered oldest leaves off of them. So like this one is an example, could be cut right down to the ground, and new ones will come up each year and replace them. Another thing to think through in this design process is putting different foliage types together and separating similar foliage types with different types of foliage. Like this Elysium, the shape of this leaf versus this yew, okay, versus the broader leaf of the holly fern that's in front of that. And then the plum yew is also separating from this larger leaf on the Allegheny viburnum. And then one of my new favorite plants, this is another plant that has a very lanceolate narrow leaf. This is a new Mahonia called Beijing Beauty. I have one of these in the garden at the house, and I'll show it off soon. It's about 2.5 feet tall and about 3 feet wide. Again, this is an understory plant for these, you know, to be in front of these larger growing screening things that will basically become tree-like in the future. This is just a fantastic Mahonia. I really, really like it. It looks wicked, but it's actually not bad. It's not bad to the touch. There's a couple of those that have been used. Another one of my absolute favorite, Elysium. This is Miss Scarlet. Another one that I have in the landscape at the house. This thing grows like this. You think that the nurseries put a lot of time into this, but mine at the house is exactly like this. It grows in a perfect ball like that without any, it doesn't spike up. You know, most plants we're gonna get, you know, a branch ahead of the rest of the plant, but this thing for some reason grows super, super uniform. This is about the same amount of growth I've had on mine since it woke up this spring. This is a red flowering Elysium, and it wears its flowers on the outside. Really, really interesting. Again, these Shindo viburnums are gonna be cut back a bit. They were very, very root bound in the container, so they need to be cut down. And you can also see These were picked at a nursery where the 3-gallon pots were very close together. And so they're getting a little naked down at the bottom anyway, just because there was no light getting down to the bottom of the plant. So a little bit of tip pruning up here will help fill some of this in. Again, no matter what, these are going to be a bit thin down toward the bottom. There's another one down at the bottom of the hill to match these. So that was also thought through, that there was already some existing Shindo viburnums. So there's one, and then a group of 3, and then a group of 3 up here. Most people probably won't pick up on that, but it was part of the thought process. There's another Beijing Beauty planted, again, that narrow lanceolate leaf against the larger, wider leaf on the Shindo viburnum. The 3 Shindos, which have been given more space than anything else in this landscape job, because they're going to be the biggest plants here ultimately. There's another Florida Sunshine Elysium planted. So we've got gold foliage on the Marmorata Akuba against the wall, and then 2 gold Florida Sunshine Elysium and 1 additional gold osmanthus up at the top of the bed. So not overdone, but it is, again, this is a shadier space, and in the evening, kind of dark over here. So these little pops of gold will stand out, and they're used against green foliage things, so that makes them stand out more. Having some green, dark color next to them. There's an osmanthus fragrans. This is going to get quite large, fragrant flowers in the fall, and depending on how our winters go, we'll get some repeat flowers on these in the late winter, early spring. This one is not the best plant I've ever purchased, but there's just so few options right now. It's a pretty rugged plant, so it'll get itself rooted in and get itself established before it goes into the first winter. This is a marginal plant here. This is something else I can point out. This is a plant that's hardy in like 7B to 10. Probably hardy in 7A if it was in a protected space, but so let's say it's hardy in 7B to 10. I'm probably not going to put a rough looking, this is Raleigh, North Carolina zone 7B. This rougher looking plant that's marginally hardy here, I'm probably not going to put in the ground in the fall. But spring planting it, I think it'll have time to really get itself, get its life back together and establish itself and make it fine through the winter. There's a Leucothoe planted next to it. And again, now we're going into the choke point here where the dog is going to come around the corner. And so we're back to salt tolerant plants. And so this is a burning love Leucothoe. It's a low growing Leucothoe that has this beautiful red stems, purple or reddish purple new foliage, depends on who's naming the color here. And then it has these, the flowers on it now, you can tell the Ericaceae plants because they're like blueberry type little bell-shaped flowers that hang down on it. This is a salt tolerant plant, so that's why it's used here. Assuming the puppy's gonna pee here for sure. Another one of those Allegheny viburnum used up here. There's a group of 3 down there and 1 up here. People buy plants in 3s, 5s, 7s, makes sense. I actually sometimes like to buy an even number of them, okay? So you have a group of 3 and a group of 1, if that's a group. If a group is a 1, it can be a group. Or, buy 8, so you can have a group of 5 and a group of 3 separated from one another. So you carry somebody down. It looks more planned when you carry a plant from down there up to the top, okay? Next up is another salt-tolerant plant. This is a Fatsia japonica, another one that's marginally hardy here. It's in a good protected space, canopy above it, urban setting, so it'll be fine, but another one that I probably wouldn't plant going into the fall. New growth is coming on it here. Got a bit of a lean to it. It's got some character to it. Somebody might not buy that plant because it's leaning, that way in the container. I actually think that plant had more character than the other ones that were near it. So that's why it was picked. Again, we're coming into this choke point. Okay, dog's definitely going to pee here. So a holly fern is placed on the corner, and probably one of the most salt-tolerant plants in the world is nandinas. This is a lemon lime nandina. This is one that doesn't flower and seed, so it's not a noxious weed, and can be kept in the 3 foot by 3 foot range, something like that. All the new growth on it has this gold foliage. It's just getting started here, and last year's growth has kind of a blue-green coloration, so you see that how that two-tone works together. And then the Arizona cypress was in a video. It was transplanted here from a container at our house and has been used in the corner here. A lot of folks commented on that video, this plant's gonna get too big for this space. Yes, it is. But again, we want to screen in somebody's lifetime. These things can be limbed up so you can walk through here in the future. Doesn't matter. We want to block this view in this lifetime, not the next. And so this will be limbed up very soon, these very bottom limbs on it anyway, because these understory plants will fill in underneath it. There's 3 of those lemon lime nandinas used. And then this is a Goshiki osmanthus. This is the other gold plant I was talking about. This one, Goshiki means 5 colors in Japanese, so it has all kinds of crazy colors in the variegation as the year goes on. This one, I showed you osmanthus fragrance, and it blooms reliably first year in the ground. It'll have flowers on it. Goshiki osmanthus will also flower, very fragrant, great flowering plant. It can take several years for these to actually flower, and when they do though, fantastic. Flowers along the stems where you can't really see them, but you can really, really smell them. And a great full plant. I've seen this plant get 8 feet tall. There's one at the Ralston that's probably 8 feet tall and 5 feet wide. It can be kept, you know, not much bigger than it is right now, honestly, probably for the next decade. A lot of pieces went into the ground here, but you can still see how wide this path is. We don't need a path this wide going around the side here. This will be narrowed in. Obviously the plants are going to grow into the space some, but also we've got some spaces here, some opportunities, I would call it, to get some ground covers in. Liriope is another thing that you can use in a targeted spot if you have a dog that, you know, you have this issue. So maybe on this side it might be liriope, maybe on this side where it's shadier it can be a juga. There's, again, Google salt tolerant plants if you have this issue and you know you're going to have a male dog, you know, hitting your plants, because things like arborvitae, it'll kill them. I mean, it'll kill a spot in it in one single urination. So, you know, those weren't used. And there are some salt tolerant hollies as well, especially some native hollies, like Yopon holly is a great example of that. This is going to get some treads of some kind in the future. In the meantime, it's going to be mulched, and then some ground cover pieces are going to go in. The last piece that I have here, the last of the actual installation videos, will be that front low sunken area that we looked at the beginning of the video, and the steps going out right behind the camera right now. So I think it looks pretty good. Once it's mulched, you know, this will look more finished. So go back and watch the first 3 videos. You can see where we're going with this, plus this video, plus the 5th video, and then we'll do a walkthrough after everything has been mulched and it's really been polished. Thank you guys for following on.